Good evening, Booktopians, and please welcome filmmaker and author John Safran. Hi, John.
Hey, hey, how are you? Thank you for having me on, and thank you for everyone who's tuning in, if that's the expression.
I think that works. Thank you
I,
so
I
much.
think I'm sounding more like Father Bob these days, where I like use these expressions that are like from my generation, not the current. Like he'll be like, "Yeah, we're on the wireless," and I'm here going, "I hope everyone's tuned in," and everyone's like, "God, it's not called tuned in, Boomer."
Yeah, it's just I guess you just watch now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to be live with John for the next half hour or so, discussing his new book on the vaping industry and big tobacco, Puff Piece. If you have a question for John, please ask it in the comments, and we will do our best to get to as many as we can. So to begin with, John, why take on this topic?
I saw this full page ad a couple of World No Tobacco Days ago, because that's a yearly day that the United Nations puts on because they're against tobacco for the obvious reasons, and they're trying to, uh, kill the cigarette industry really. And so Philip Morris, who are the Marlboro people, they took out a full page ad, which I saw that said, "Hey, we're shutting down as a cigarette company." And we're going to relaunch as a health enterprise dedicated to getting the world's 1 billion smokers, including our own customers, off cigarettes. And I was like, what? And I thought, maybe this is just one of those moments, a bit like the fall of the Berlin Wall or the end of apartheid, where like there's just this shift that just happens. And because obviously tobacco kills so many people each year. And but then I did started to snoop around a bit, and what do you know? You can't take what the Marlboro makers say just on face value, and and what they were doing was wild, and I was confused why no one else is covering this. So I thought, yeah, this sounds like my type of thing, and I was a bit not discouraged, but I was confused. I was going, is this not a thing? Like, why is no one else talking about this? Like, and but so I took the risk that it was a thing and I wasn't mad, although I suspected I was for so long, even after I handed in the book. But then the book's come out and the jury has spoken. John Safran, not mad. This is a thing. And
Why
so, oh, no, sorry.
I was just going to ask, but why do you think it is that tobacco activism is kind of not kind of the forefront of activism that it used to be? Why did this kind of go underreported?
I think for a number of reasons. So just supersonically going, because it's such a complicated thing, but supersonically just going through what they're attempting is that uh, across Europe, the European Union, the European Parliament, they passed a law a couple of years ago. They said, listen, 2020, May 2020, on a particular morning, we're going to ban the production and sales of menthol cigarettes all across Europe. And Philip Morris, the Marlboro makers, were like, uh-oh, because it was clearly this is the first step. Like they want to ban all cigarettes for obvious reasons, but they have to start somewhere. So this was really like the beginning of the end for Philip Morris International. That's what they'd be thinking. And so they came up with this. God, why do I never have it on me when I'm about to do a thing? And we've only got 30 minutes. I don't want to waste 45 seconds running to it. Anyway, they came up with this thing. They said, okay, fine, yeah, we're not going to manufacture menthol cigarettes anymore. But I tell you what, we've got this new product, and it's a menthol heat stick. And you just look at it, you hold it up to anyone, and they're like, hang on, that looks like a cigarette. And because it's just a bit shorter than a cigarette, but it's got a filter, and it's tobacco rolled in paper that you plant between your lips, inhaling nicotine and tobacco into your lungs. But they say, no, 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 it's not a cigarette, it's a heat stick. And so they had to do this and play this little word game to try to weave around the ban on menthol cigarettes. And they got away with it. It was amazing. So last year, all menthol cigarettes were banned across Europe, but now you can buy menthol heat sticks. And just to be clear, I mean, it's this. We're not talking about vaping here. This isn't a vape. This is tobacco rolled in paper with a filter at one end that you plant between your lips, inhaling nicotine and tobacco into your lungs, exhaling this thing that kind of looks a lot like smoke. But by playing this little word game, they got away with it. But yeah, it's the opposite of a zeitgeist issue, because it just seems like such a 1970s thing. Like, oh, great, John, you're looking at how cigarettes are bad. Why don't you grow sideburns and put on some bell-bottom trousers whilst investigating this? And because that's how sort of like out of date it seems as an issue. And but whilst it might not be the zeitgeist in our heads, like for the cancer cells growing in the bodies of people who smoke, it's very zeitgeist. And for at the cemeteries, and for all the hearse drivers driving all the people who die of cancer from cigarettes, very much of the zeitgeist for them, and very much the zeitgeist for the hospital beds, including in Australia, because 52 million people die of everything each year across the world. And out of that, 8 million of them are cigarette related. But it's like somehow, still, it's sort of like just seen as this yeah, we get it. Like it just seems like such an unzeitgeist issue compared to like zeitgeist issues. And of course, these are all great issues. I'm not ragging on people for supporting these, but yet you think of things that's like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, trans rights, and they're sort of where the focus is. And then meanwhile, Philip Morris is managed to stay alive, has come up with this little word game, this little switcheroo, substitute the words cigarette for heat stick, and so they can stay alive as a business, and it worked. And another reason I think people's eyes weren't on it is because people's eyes were to an extent on vaping, and so this sort of gets lost in the jumble of that because it's all a bit confusing. So it's like, so vaping, and yes, there's a lot of criticism of that because kids were dying in America because they had this black market vape juice that was killing them and sending others to hospital. So it's all focused on that. And whilst everyone's eyes were on that, Philip Morris released this heat stick, and they even set up these stores in America. They started opening up stores that got no investigation from the media, and because it just kind of got all lost in the jumble of it all.
It's interesting. You've already touched on language, and I wanted to ask you a question around that because the book is almost as much about language as it is about smoking.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what Philip Morris is doing to language at the moment when it comes to smoking?
Yeah. So one of the ways that they're getting around things is just by changing words, and I guess in some like very general sense, not that we really think about it that much, but if we did, we'd kind of go, oh yeah, I get it. It's like, people sort of spin things, and the media advertisers spin things, but this is like insane. This is like rewording things and sucking the meaning out of language in the most high stakes way possible. And so for instance, just by changing the word heat stick to cigarette, from a cigarette to heat stick, they get to stay alive as a business. Like the biggest pushback probably in the history of cigarettes, the banning of them across Europe for menthol cigarettes, is they got around that by changing the word cigarette to heat stick, and the legislation just wasn't built for. What happens is Philip Morris puts out a product and just dares us, just says, no, this isn't a cigarette. This is a heat stick. Then on top of that, they say that the discharge from it isn't smoke. They say it's aerosol. But I looked up the word aerosol in the dictionary, and it's explaining it. And one of the examples of aerosol is smoke. So the fact that this is aerosol doesn't necessarily mean it's not smoke. But I mean, there are like they have done little adjustments that they use to justify it. But of course, the other big word game they play is the thing that actually kills you in a conventional cigarette is tar, and so the heat stick doesn't contain tar. But it does. They've just changed the word tar to nicotine-free dry particulate matter. So if you're trying to do some little, like a look into this, it's like, oh, it's got no tar in it. And they've been so clever at this tricky language that I looked at an article that was in a science journal where these scientists hate Philip Morris, hate this heat stick, and but even they were kind of tricked by this language game and didn't realize that nicotine-free dry particulate matter is tar. And look how ingenious Philip Morris are with their little word games, is that it's the most infamous nicotine product in the world. And they've identified a part of the most infamous nicotine product in the world that doesn't have the nicotine in it, because that's in another part of the cigarette. And they've labeled that nicotine-free dry particulate matter. So they get to place the expression nicotine-free on the most infamous nicotine product in the world. So they're so brilliant. And whatever they're getting paid, it's not enough. And I started realizing that we're living through a time at the moment where like there's so many words are up for grabs for like changing the meaning. And I found this like particularly interesting just because, like I'm really into Scrabble, and like I grew up, I went to this religious Jewish high school, with the side locks and the furry hats and stuff. And for Jews, like words are just so important. Like, we're the people of the book, and we learn that God created the universe by breathing words. And so the power of words was always like hanging over me when I grew up. And I just thought, oh my God, this is Philip Morris. This is what the rabbis were talking about, the power of words, like, because they talk about how you can use words, God, not only God, but people. We can use words to bend realities. And, like that's how powerful words are. And then, yeah, this is what the rabbis were talking about, Philip Morris and their heat stick.
So for everyone who's just tuned in or joined us, we're live now with John Safran talking about his new book, Puff Piece, about big tobacco and the vaping industry. And if you have a burning question for John, please feel free to ask it in the comments and we'll do our best to get to them through the show. We've had one commenter come through who said that the phrase heat sticks sounds eerily similar to the death sticks in Star Wars. There's only a new bit you can say that.
Yeah, that is. Isn't that in one of the Star Wars sequels? I did see that. I became obsessed with how, whilst doing this book, how cigarettes were treated in popular culture. And yeah, and through that, it was like, oh, there's this scene in one of the Star Wars sequels that's got this like slightly clunky, like especially for Star Wars, because where else in Star Wars? It's not like elsewhere in Star Wars, it's like they're about to take off in one of their kind of little spaceships. And it's like, and remember kids, put on the seatbelt. But suddenly, for some reason, I don't know even who they were, but Obi-Wan Kenobi's suddenly talking about death sticks or whatever. Yeah. So maybe that's where they got the name.
So can you outline a little bit about what the difference between what Philip Morris is doing with heat sticks is to vapes and the vaping industry?
So the thing that kills you in a cigarette, and this is like so much of the book, it's about words, but it's about words being used as misdirection. And misdirection is like Philip Morris is so smart at it. Like, because I was focusing so hard on, and I kept on being duped. I kept on like thinking something was one thing, and then I'd be driving my car a week later and go, hang on. And so to give you an example of what I mean is, oh my God. Okay. So Philip Morris says the reason this isn't a cigarette, and the reason it's different. So the reason it's different from a conventional cigarette is because it doesn't emit smoke. They say that with a conventional cigarette, you light it, it catches a light, and that causes combustion, and combustion generates smoke. And with this heat stick, you slide it into this device, this electronic device. It kind of looks like a cool astronaut's pen or something. And then this device heats it to an incredible degree, but it doesn't actually let it catch a light. And so they say that because it's only heating it to an incredible degree, which makes it generate this discharge, it's not actually smoke, even though it looks like smoke. Anyway, so the first rabbit's hole I fell down was like, what actually is the definition of smoke? And then I discovered that and these according to the American Medical Association, the way, because there's an article describing how a cigarette works, and I find out that in an old school conventional cigarette, the way smoke is first generated, not when it catches a light, but beforehand when it's heated to an incredible degree. So even on that level, like even if we take their word for it on other levels, it's like, hang on, you're bullshitting us about that. Like, because you're saying this only heats to an incredible degree and that's what generates a discharge, but that's what generates the smoke in a conventional cigarette. But and so then it becomes their argument is, so let's go along with their reality that this isn't smoke that's coming out of the heat stick. Fine, cool, we'll go along with that, right? And then I realize there's another misdirection because their claim is that it's the smoke that kills you in a cigarette. So therefore, if this doesn't have smoke, it's a less risky alternative. And very wobbly language, very like, notice they don't say safer, they don't say healthier, they don't go there. And it's words like better, like things that are really hard for a scientist to sort of pin down, like what does better mean or whatever. But anyway, let's say that it's true that it's the smoke. That's not even true in itself. What the truth is, what really kills you in a cigarette is the tar within the smoke. So therefore, if you've got this other thing that's aerosol and not smoke, but it's still generating the tar, like who cares that it's not smoke? And so then that's when I realized that was like another little misdirection, and that this heat stick generates tar just like a cigarette does. But how the hell are you going to know about that? Because they've reworded the word tar to nicotine-free dry particulate matter. But anyway, I say all that because the cigarette and the heat stick contains tobacco. That's what generates tar, right? In a vape, so a vape just steams a liquid, and the liquid contains propylene glycerol, it contains flavoring, it contains nicotine, but it doesn't actually contain any tobacco leaf. Vapes don't contain tobacco leaf. So therefore, they don't generate tar. So therefore, a vapor can say, and it's the truth, they can say the deadly thing in a cigarette isn't in a vape. And so that's how it's different to a vape. But then it becomes, well, you're still inhaling these other things in a vape, which may be maybe detrimental to your health and maybe even in a serious way. But you know, it's not actually tar. It's the other things that are kind of consequential in a vape. So so the heat stick contains tobacco. A vape doesn't contain tobacco. So, and Philip Morris totally bend into vaping and sort of imply that their thing is a vape when there's any good news about vaping. So
what is their long-term plan with the way that they're approaching the vaping industry?
Well, because this is their two big challenges for Philip Morris. One is that cigarettes are getting banned, so they have to come up with something else besides cigarettes and the heat stick. But the other thing is vaping is filling the hole, and so the vaping is their big competitor. Like it's them against the vaping world in some ways, and so that's when it becomes really messy because Philip Morris is in some ways getting involved in some vaping things, but to my mind, that's not their main game. That's just, you know, it's a huge diversified company with different branches, and so they're dabbling in vaping, but I don't feel that's their big game plan. And the reason it's not their big game plan is that because with this heat stick, they've got like a unique product. Like vaping, you know, people can just cook up vaping juice in their garage, and lots of the big vaping companies in Australia, Australasia, for instance, like the biggest one, like that started off in someone's garage and just grew and grew and grew. And so it's quite easy to get involved in the vaping industry. And if you're very good at it, building a big vaping company, whilst it's going to be really hard to replicate these heat sticks or whatever. So they want to have a product that's hard to copy, and a product that they can tell shareholders, hey, we've got a future with a unique product. And also the story to shareholders, which is kind of different to the one they give the public, the fact that it's tobacco, they don't hide from that when they're talking to shareholders. They leverage that. They say, this is why we're a good company to invest in, because we've got this unique thing. We're in the tobacco business. We own tobacco. We own that sector. And the vaping industry can't own that sector because they don't use tobacco leaf.
We've got a question through in the comments from Peter Rees. She asks, I was concerned when my daughter started learning about smoking in her health class this year. Surely kids know the dangers of traditional smoking. This is what they need to be teaching kids about today in regards to vaping and heat sticks. What do you think about what is being taught to kids about this?
It's really confusing trying to figure out what people think about vaping. Like, you definitely have vapers who say it's healthier than cigarettes, and that's kind of true. But there's a counter argument depending on how you look at it, because as we've already discussed, it is true that it's safer than a cigarette in that it doesn't contain tobacco leaf, so it doesn't generate tar, so it doesn't have that deadly thing. But it does have these other. You are inhaling stuff into your lungs, and and scientists are looking into that, and it does seem, in a very general sense, like, why would it not be dangerous to be inhaling steam into your lungs? Like, if you just inhaled steamed water, for instance, let alone the other ingredients, into your lungs over a sustained period of time, like, that's not going to be good for you. And so the tricky thing about vaping is that if someone was addicted to cigarettes and they weaned themselves off that for just, say, 6 months or a year through vaping, and then at the end of those 6 months or a year, they put to one side both the cigarettes and the vapes, there are people, like, there's at least one reputable body, the UK government's National Health Service, and they endorse that. They say, no, that's a good plan. It is that, to use vaping as a tool to get off cigarettes. But I think it's only going to truly be healthy if you then, after a kind of a short period of time, then you get off them both. Whilst if you're just huffing at a vape for the next 10 years, all day and night, I think that's a pretty big roll of the dice. That's not going to have some other really consequential health issues, because you're still putting like propylene glycerol, which I don't even know what that means, but it sounds like you shouldn't have that, and nicotine and flavorings into your lungs and into your respiratory system and your blood and everything like that. So that's why it's probably not, like, it's probably too much of a roll of the dice, I'd say, to think you can do that for 10 years and the scientists not saying in 7 years, oh, by the way, we've just discovered that really screws you up in a very detrimental way too. And the other confusing thing when discussing all this is the notion of nicotine versus tobacco, because nicotine occurs naturally in tobacco, but then it can be extracted. So that's why you can have in vape juice, you can have nicotine without the tobacco. And in a very general sense, nicotine is the agent that makes you addicted to the danger without actually being the danger itself. So that becomes, so depending on how you look at it, nicotine's either not about it at all, or it's all about it. So, because it's still addicting you to the other danger. And, like, for instance, I don't think you have to you definitely don't need a prescription. I don't think you even need to be 18 to go into a chemist warehouse and buy nicotine gum, for instance. And we've got very strict, our Therapeutic Health and Goods Administration are very strict. We're not like cowboys here in Australia. And so the fact that they've decided you can have nicotine gum without a prescription means, that says to me, that's the proof shot of, like, it can't be nicotine in and of itself that is the sort of like the direct danger, but it is what addicts you to the danger. So then there's a story. Some people have a thing of, the cigarette companies are trying to get you on vaping, and so you get addicted through the nicotine, and then that will lead you to cigarettes. And I just don't know whether that's true or not. Like I don't have any. That's for some other book writer yeah, the whole thing of like how conscious they are, and how like the smoking gun of they're trying to get kids to smoke in the case of Philip Morris and heat sticks, or in the case of the vape industry, they're trying to get kids to vape. Like there's not really a smoking gun. There's just more like this sort of circumstantial woollier thing. So for instance, Juul, which is a leading vaping brand in America, they'll have ads and they feature 25-year-old hot models looking really cool. And they can legitimately say, well, you know, the 25-year-old models. So it's like, yes. But it's not like that's not going to look appealing to a 15-year-old too. You know, like a 15-year-old's not going to like, I don't know, count the lines on the forehead of the cool looking person with the afro in the Juul ad or whatever. So even if they mightn't sort of like, there's not a smoking gun that they're directly trying to appeal to kids, maybe incidentally they are. And also the vaping industry, a lot of their product branding is things like wacky flavors that can look like, you know, have iconography of like Atari computer games and iconography of like heavy metal album covers. So it's like something that is going to appeal to a 30-year-old, because 30-year-old are all sitting at home playing, you know, their video games and are into heavy metal albums and stuff like that. So again, it's sort of like, but then, you know, to a 12-year-old, they're going to think, oh, that ghoul, that skeleton, or that devil icon and mascot on the vaping juice, that's kind of appeals to me too. So yeah, it's hard to sort of like, at least I didn't like, I didn't get any smoking gun that anyone's directly trying to appeal to kids, but it seems like, yes, those things look like they would appeal to kids as well as appealing to, you know, 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds.
Yeah.
So, and then there's just that thing that makes no sense to me, where it's like, they mightn't be trying to appeal to kids, but like in the case of Philip Morris, they need new customers, surely. There's no way that, so like those 21, let's say that they can say, listen, we're just trying to get people who are over 21 or something, or over 25. Yeah, but those 21-year-olds were underage, you know, 4 years ago or whatever. So how does that work, Philip Morris? You're really not trying to, like, yeah, it's all like very woolly and slippery.
Yeah, you really another part of the book that stands out is the way you grapple with some of these ethical questions around the ethics of working for Philip Morris and the people who take those jobs. And you have some really interesting conversations as well with people like, I believe it was a conversation you had with Father Bob, where he said that he thought tobacco should be provided at state's expense to inmates in prisons.
Yeah.
When you went through this journey, did you find that that your preconceived opinions that you went into this with changed because of some of these investigations and conversations you had?
My biggest change was, and I kind of appreciated it on an intellectual level, and also on a level of, cool, I get to write this book with totally new material that no one is like, it's not like, not only is there not another book about all this, it's not like, oh, I read an article in the New York Times and this expands on that. Like, there's not an article in the New York Times about this either. So definitely the main thing was, I could not believe how Philip Morris is in the seams of so many things. And it's like wild, like finding out an Indigenous health organization in New Zealand, fully funded by Philip Morris through this, you know, shell company, or I don't know if shell company is the right word, but through this other company that sounds like it's a public service. It's called the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. How much does that sound like Quit Victoria? But it's not. It's 100% fully funded by Philip Morris International, the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. And they 100% sponsor a Indigenous health organisation in New Zealand, where, like, the tricky thing, my God, is because we've only got 30 minutes, I can't even like start unpicking all these things or whatever. But yeah, I mean, that I just found it so wild that they were everywhere. And for instance, like many people, like I've got superannuation, and through that, and like I'm like a lot of people, like I don't even really understand what it all means. And then I find out superannuation, they invest in super funds, and a super fund might invest in something like called the blah blah 100 or something like that. And then you find out that one of those companies within it is Philip Morris. And then it's like, oh my God, like I'm doing this book about how complicity and about their slipperiness and about the ethics of sort of like helping out Philip Morris. And the whole time, like before I even started this book, like through my superannuation, like I'm giving money to Philip, I invested in Philip Morris. So the way that they're just everywhere is kind of amazing to me. But I guess when it comes to because I guess, and it just I guess comes across in the book. I don't make too much of it for artistic reasons. I can talk about that, but I'm kind of like you should know all this, but like if you want to do what you want to do, like fine, do it. But like I believe me, I cannot take the high moral ground on anything. Like if you smoke cigarettes, like I've done worse, and Jesus, I do worse in this book. None of this stops me from smoking and trying out anything that's shoved in my mouth through the book. Like imagine if I came out, I was like, guys, you got to be really careful with cigarettes. And people are going to be like, hang on, aren't you that guy that was on the television taking peyote, trying to get high on peyote in an Arizona desert? I'm nearly sure I saw that, John. So yeah, thanks for your finger wagging. So, but I just don't think that's the most effective way of trying to tell people to. I mean, first of all, what can I do? But what I can do in my limited way is but my argument to people would be, listen, I understand cigarettes look cool. I totally think they do. They look cool. And all these artists I kind of liked when I was younger, they smoked, and it might have been a part of, that just inspired their arts in some way, helped them ruminate and everything. So like cigarettes are really cool. And also on top of that, I really like how you're not meant to do them. So people say don't do them. So it seems like it's kind of like fun and, a bit like, like going to a firing range or something. Like, you're not really meant to do that and stuff. So it's like, I like that bit of it. And I remember also when I used to work in an office, I really liked how the smokers would go out the front. I'd sometimes join them or go in the stairwell, and they'd use that chance to decompress and kind of like, say what they really felt about the boss. And so I really like that ritualistic aspect. So I like everything about cigarettes, except then on the other side is the cancer thing. And no matter how many cool things are on this side, you can't sort of balance that out. Like that doesn't outbalance the cancer thing. And then when you get cancer, it's like awful for you, obviously, for a long time. But then like you really screw up your friends and your family, because they're like, oh my God, like he's dying. And like, yeah, so that's sort of like the other side of the equation.
So we're rapidly running out of time. In fact, we're already a little bit over. So I just thought if you've got time, we could take one more question from the audience.
Sure. Yeah.
So we've got a question. Is local legislation keeping up as the technology and products change?
No. And it's continuing not to keep up. We like, you hear all this stuff on the news. Like, for instance, it's like, in so much as if you are following it, you've probably heard that October 1st this year, there's like some big change in the laws around vaping. And some people who are into vaping are like really worried about this and anxious. Oh, I'm not going to be able to get nicotine vaping devices anymore. And I mean, for better or worse, don't worry, you're going to be able to do exactly what you've been able to do up until now. And in fact, you're going to be able to do more so, for better or worse, because at the moment it's not legal. So unless you're getting stuff under the counter, it's not legal to buy nicotine vape juice or nicotine vape devices in Australia. But it is legal for a person, not a business, not a company, but for an individual. It's totally legal for them just to go online and order nicotine vape juice, usually from New Zealand, sometimes from America, sometimes other places or whatever. And like once you kind of, I imagine if you're a bit older, that can be a bit confusing. But once you figure it out, like, and because I did this myself, all you do is you just order it from New Zealand, and it's on your doorstep within 24 to 48 hours, and that's remaining because and again, it's kind of too finicky to be able to fully discuss here, but there's all these, there's there's so many like ill-defined things. Like for instance, you're meant to have a doctor's you're meant to have a doctor's certificate to order it from overseas, but the people from overseas don't have to, technically speaking, ask you for it. And so, but basically, for better or worse, you're still going to be able to do what you've been able to do up until now. But the difference about October 1st is now you're going to be able to, although you kind of could still do this beforehand, that's why it's so tricky. But now it's kind of going to be more solidified that you can go to your doctor in Australia and get a nicotine prescription. And if you can find a chemist that's stocking nicotine juice, you'll be able to like buy it through that. So it's kind of like formalizing things and introducing that more into the health sector. So I suppose if you're into harm minimization, you'd be thinking that's a good thing because the person's going to the doctor can monitor it and say, listen, I'm going to let you do, I'll give you a prescription for 10 a year, but you have to, reduce the nicotine dosage as you go along. And so if that's what your belief is, that's why this is a good thing. And the other accidental thing, which I heard recently from a guy who runs a vape company, is because of COVID, there's been a real burst of what's it called, telehealth, where you can get consultations over online, and that was very rare up until COVID. So it was nearly impossible to somehow leverage that for getting a nicotine prescription, because you somehow there's like a sprinkling of telehealth people, and most of those, if not all of those, didn't know or wouldn't endorse giving you nicotine. Whilst now, because there's this burst of telehealth, there's going to be telehealth services that are specifically like reverse engineering, specifically set up so people who want to vape can use them as their as a kind of as a doctor, as a medical service that will give them that prescription. Because that's the other thing that vapers worry about, is that doctors, just because doctors are allowed, they might be dead against this. Like, because lots of people, for obvious reasons, are dead against it. So just because doctors, technically speaking, can give you a nicotine prescription after October 1st, there will be many, many doctors who are like, no, I'm not going to give it to you because I don't think it's a good thing.
Yeah. Look, I won't keep you for much longer. Last question from me. What do you hope readers take from Puff Piece?
I hope they learn, because as he said, like, we've been really medical heavy here, right? Whilst the book is so much about language, and also the book, you'll agree with this, and also read the online reviews. It's like a funny book. It's like it's total shtick. It's total Sappho shtick. Me on a crazy adventure. Me and my lunch with a Philip Morris executive, and oh my god, like, people are like just telling me that they're kind of like, it's hard to, like, they're cringing, out of the humor, like reading that lunch scene, like, as much as anything I've ever done on like TV or whatever. Like, it's just really like funny kind of humor and sort of like uncomfortable, and oh my god, I can't believe John's doing this and whatever. So yeah, I hope they have a good laugh also is one thing. But yeah, just to learn how we can really be tricked into new realities just by people who have the audacity to try it on, to change the English language and evaporate the meanings of words and replace them with other meanings. And then hopefully, man, we'll all be able to like fight against the system.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, John. And
no, thank you.
And if you would like to order a copy of Puff Piece, you can do so right now, booktopia.com.au. As of this recording, we still have some signed copies left available. And John did a very strenuous job lifting all those boxes.
I carried 29 boxes. I forget how many of them. Half were like readings, half Booktopia or whatever. But 29 boxes because of COVID, because I can't go out to sign, and I live in Melbourne. I had to, so no one can accuse me of being some inner city bohemian who doesn't know about real work, because I carried 29 boxes up my stairs, signed the boxes and packing tape, then carrying them down the stairs again. So yeah, this is my sweat. My literal sweat might be on these books.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, John. And
Thank you.
yeah, congratulations on Puff Piece.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us.